Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today afternoon. I am Dr. Piyush Singh, Counselor, Embassy of India, Bern. I welcome all of you to this webinar on opportunities in Indian nutraceuticals and wellness sector today. Wellness is a theme on which the Government of India has tremendous focus. Swachh Bharat Mission, the mission Clean India, Fit India movement, celebration of International Day of Yoga are all steps in this direction. There is a renewed focus on the systems of traditional medicine. Significant efforts and initiatives have been made to improve government accountability on health. For instance, the government has committed to enhancing the public health expenditure to, to 2.5% of GDP by 2025. The National Health Policy 2017 recommends state governments' health budget to be more than 8% of their total budgets by 2020. The government is committed to establishing well-equipped 1.5 lakh health and wellness centers by 2022. Today, India is regarded as the pharmacy of the world. During the present COVID-19 crisis, India has ensured medical supplies to 123 partner countries. The Government of India has undertaken a number of reforms for further increasing the ease of doing business in India and also for further integrating a self-reliant India with the world. Today's webinar is a step in this direction, focusing on both the investment and the trade aspects of this in the nutraceuticals and wellness sector. India and Switzerland have long-standing dynamic partnership. The Embassy of India, Bern, has been running the MISSP program for further linking and strengthening the link between the Indian and Swiss business ecosystems. In the last 6 months, more than 50 Swiss companies have onboarded on this program. Today, our presenters will include the knowledge partner of MISSP, which is TNA Consulting, the legal and tax partner of MISSP, who are Rodel and Partner, with us. I will be moderating the session for you. With those words, let me invite the first speaker of the day, Mr. Tarun Gupta, Partner TNA Consulting, to please make his presentation on the Indian economy amid the COVID-19 crisis. Mr. Gupta, the screen is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Singh. And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for taking time out for attending this webinar. As Dr. Singh mentioned, the entire world is going through challenging times. As one European leader a couple of decades ago said, never let a good crisis go waste. So how can, in this current pandemic, there'll be new business models, there'll be new business partnerships. Can India be the preferred business partner for Switzerland? What are the opportunities present in India and what are the challenges? What is changing in India? What has changed in India? The aim of my presentation would be to give you a balanced view on India and not the Bollywood version. I am also familiar that over the last few weeks, there has been a deluge of presentations, webinar. We'll try to keep this presentation different. We'll try to give you some key messages, and those would be the key takeaways from today's presentation. So when you think of India, let's see 4 letters, 4 Ds of India. What are those Ds? Democracy, demography, diversity, and disparity. Democracy, we are justifiably proud, largest democracy. In our last federal election, we had 900 million electorate, 600 million people voted, and we had the result out in a couple of hours. Commendable. But the democracy can be chaotic sometimes. Right? The decision making may be delayed. Demography. We are a young country. Our median age is 29. 70% of our population is in the working age group between 15 to 65. We will account for about 20% of the global workforce. And interestingly, we will add every month, month on month, till 2035 the population of Switzerland every month to our working age. So a big challenge for our policymakers, we need to create jobs. Third is diversity. We love our food. The topic is very contemporary today, but the food can vary. There is more diversity in India as you move from Nordics to the Southern Europe in terms of food habits, in terms of cultural habits, in terms of languages. We have 22 official languages. So as a foreign company, that may make your task a bit more challenging, and not to look at India as one unitary country rather than a diverse set of conglomeration of different people. And finally, disparity. We have the third largest number of billionaires. Top 1% of the population controls 60% of the country's wealth. Top 10% controls 77% of the wealth. Even our development has not been equitable. There's a difference of 10x between developed and the least developed states. In other countries like China, Brazil, this difference is 4x. So one of the challenges for us, how do we create an equitable development? And if you look at the graph on your screen, India is probably the only country which went from agrarian to services. Today, our services sector accounts for about 55% of our GDP. Our information technology sector, which accounts for about 8% of our GDP, 1/3 of our exports, it employs only 1% of our workforce. So the message from here is we need to get our manufacturing right. So what's our vision? We want to be a 5 trillion economy. It took us 60 years to reach our first trillion, another 7.5 years to reach our second trillion. And now we need to double our GDP in the next 5 years. Is it ambitious? Yes, it is very ambitious. And what does it require? It will require a real growth rate of 8% and a virtuous cycle of savings, exports, and investments. How are we doing in investments? If you look at the graph, since 70 years, we have got $600 billion of foreign direct investment in India. But two interesting facets. 300 billion of that has come in the last 5 years. 90% of that has come through the automatic route. What it means is it did not require any government approval. And as a foreign company, that's interesting because it gives you an idea how open the economy is. So you do not necessarily need a local partner. Should you wish not to share your intellectual property or trade secret, that's fine. Most of the sectors are open to 100% foreign direct investment. And India has been ranked as the third most preferred greenfield destination. And why is that? The graph on your right answers that question. India has seen a 79 position jump in ease of doing business. We have consistently ranked amongst the top 10 improvers in terms of this ranking. And there is a new buzzword now when companies look to diversify their supply chain. We all heard of BRICS. Now it's called MIVIT: Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, India, Thailand. And as a comparison, we stand reasonably favorably even in this new set of potential competitors. But one thing which we have different is that we have a large domestic market. So this part now brings me to the end of my first part of this presentation, where we spoke about 4 Ds: the India vision and the ease of doing business. The second part is about the India opportunity. And the 4 alphabets which best describe this are CFID: consumption, which is on your screen, formalization, infrastructure, and digitization. So when I look at consumption, India, unlike some of the other emerging economies, is a consumption-driven economy. 60% of our GDP comes from domestic consumption. We are the 6th largest consumer market, and we expect to become the 3rd largest consumer market in 10 years. And our whole private consumption is expected to increase by 4 times in the next decade. So clearly, the demography which I spoke earlier, and now I'm talking consumption, is one of the biggest reason why companies look at India. Moving on, if you look at it, formalization. Why this is important in formalization? India has about 75 million enterprises, of which only 10 million, have any kind of tax registration. And only 5 million have tax as well as social security registration. And why this is relevant? Reason being, 60 million broadly fall under the informal sector. And if you look at the graph, 85% of our manufacturing firms are less than 50 employees. So what has happened is, we have created what are known as dwarfs, where companies have remained small, even after a decade, less than 100 employees. And this has hampered productivity. Second aspect of formalization, we need to improve our tax GDP ratio. Our tax GDP ratio is 17%, whereas some of the other emerging markets, it's 22%, 27% for South Africa, 34% for Brazil. So we need to improve our tax to GDP ratio. And finally, we also need to improve our whole culture of contract, enforcement of contract. And that's why we have the bankruptcy code, wherein first time in India's history, companies were liquidated. That brings about a better debtor discipline. So that moves to the third point, I of CFID, is infrastructure. This is my favorite topic. To achieve a 5 trillion economy, we need to double our investment rate from about $150 billion annually to about $300 billion. How have we been doing? If anybody has been on Indian roads, that can be an interesting experience. But look at our national highways. Our current national highway length is about 140,000 kilometers. 30% has been built only in the last 5 years. And in the next 5 years, we aim to build another 60,000 kilometers. So effectively, what we are saying is, we are doubling our national highway in 10 years. Railways, we have about 68,000 kilometers of railways. We have about 30,000 electrified, and in the next 5 years, we are aiming to achieve 100% electrification. Similarly, I can go on solar. In 10 years, we've increased our solar installed capacity by 1,000 times. Moving on, the final opportunity, D, digitization. If you look at the pyramid, it's very interesting. It's called the India Stack, which is known as presence-less, paperless, cashless. We are aiming for a holy trinity, JAM, wherein 1 billion people on mobile phones, 1 billion people with biometrics, and 1 billion bank accounts. And what it does, and if you see on your right, we have 380 million new bank accounts open. So what it has done is, we have transferred a lot of public welfare schemes directly to people's bank account. It has cut down corruption. We have transferred over $100 billion over the last few years. And second, even for B2C transactions, after 70 years, we had 50 million credit cards holders. But last January, we did over 1 billion transactions in a month. In fact, the largest mobile wallet company in India has 150 million active users, and they reach out to 2,000 towns. So we've taken a significant jump, instead of credit cards, directly to the use of internet banking. In fact, Google wrote to that similar model would be good for America. They wrote to Federal Reserve. The Bank of International Settlements said that India's digital financial infrastructure can be used to transform emerging markets and advanced economies. And the reason? We have 600 million mobile users on the internet. People use mobile. And our data consumption has increased by 44 times. So I recap the 4 words of India opportunity: CFID, consumption, formalization, infrastructure, and digitization. Now, when you have an opportunity, a good question comes on taxation. Well, we have taken care of that. We have made a huge reduction in our corporate tax rates. In fact, if you look at our, for new manufacturing, it's even net effective rate is even as low as 17%. But more importantly, we have also taken care where we were infamous for our litigation in tax authorities. But now we have signed 300 advanced pricing agreements. What it does is provides predictability and certainty to overseas investors. We've also taken care of our indirect tax. Today we have one tax, goods and service tax. It has brought about efficiency in logistics. We aim to reduce our logistics cost from 14% of the GDP to 10% of the GDP. Our warehouses numbers have, the size of the warehouses has increased. From 5,000 square meters, it's not uncommon to see 50,000 square meters. So with that, it brings me to the final section of my presentation, the reforms. So we spoke about India. We spoke about India opportunity. Now the final is reforms. 4 letters. We start with laws. Yes, we could have less of it. We want to reduce the compliance burden. And we have repealed 1,000 laws. We have brought about online so that the manual intervention, the discretion is not there. This brings about transparency. This brings about certainty. And the next slide gives you an idea how the cost of compliance has come down, whether it's for a documentary credit. The second letter is L again, and this time it stands for liquidity. All over the world, governments are putting out packages, stimulus packages. We have taken an approach wherein we have said that we would be giving collateral fee loans to our small enterprises. Our bank lending rates have come down. We have not thrown money. We've been sensible about it, always keeping an eye also on the fiscal deficit. Third brings me to the point of labor. Now, this has been tricky for investors. We have had large number of labor laws at the central level, at the state level. But now what's happening? We have competitive federalism. States are competing to reduce the labor burden. And most importantly, our federal government is coming out to replace all those 44 central laws into 4 codes around wages, around social security, around industrial policy and industrial relations, safety and relations. So that will be a huge, huge sigh of relief for foreign investors. And finally, land. In India, land costs tend to be expensive. Land acquisition tends to be difficult and time consuming. But what's happening now? We are having online land registry. We are having online database of land allotment. One of the states has announced you can buy land directly from farmers. Essentially, we want to make the process faster, transparent, and hopefully cheaper. Today, for highways, the land acquisition cost per acre is about $100,000. In fact, if you look at the next slide, we have 44 industrial clusters. And what we do understand, we have 2 million square feet, 2 million square meters of industrial space ready for possession in the next 8 to 10 weeks. On that note, I end my presentation by showing you, which I am very proud of, the marquee names cutting across sectors who made a presence in India. And we would love to see more Swiss companies here. And with that, I thank you everyone for taking time out, and we'll be happy to take questions at the end of this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gupta, for that comprehensive presentation. I think this is the first webinar we've been able to, comfortably complete our presentations, and not being in a hurry. So thank you for that. Let me tell the audience that we will be very shortly putting a poll, which will appear on the upper right side of your screens. We also have a handout, which is again available on the upper right side of the screen, of your screens, which has a teaser on the Indian nutraceutical and wellness industry. So we'll appreciate if you would like to download it. Now let me, from here on, move to the next presentation, which again would be falling on the shoulders of Mr. Tarak Gupta, and which is on the overview and opportunities in the Indian nutraceuticals and wellness sectors. So Mr. Gupta, please continue on with your presentation.
Sure. Thank you once again. And Dr. Singh, you laid a very good foundation, saying that this topic could not have been more timely. the whole discussion in this world is about immune system, immune system, immune system. And hopefully, after this presentation, we all walk out with some newer ideas. And as a citizen, we are proud that we have a very ancient lineage on in this field, which it's my privilege to share with the audience. So, what's our healthcare? Dr. Singh mentioned earlier in his opening remarks that the government has said that we are going to increase our healthcare spend. There's a reason for it. At the moment, our healthcare spend as a percentage of GDP, government healthcare spend is about 1.5%. Our healthcare insurance penetration is very low. It's about 20-25%. And our out-of-pocket healthcare expenditure is 60-62% compared to 10% in the UK, 25% in Brazil. So when your healthcare out-of-pocket expenditure is high, what do? Prevention is better than cure. And that leads me to the topic, how this sector is so important and relevant. There are some numbers, but let me give you the story behind the numbers. Today, we have about 18% of the world's population, and we account for 2% of the global nutraceutical market. What are the three key areas, applications of nutraceutical? Nutritional deficiency is one. Second is muscle building, which is still less. The third is weight management. And I will come on this nutritional deficiency part. And if you look at it, we break down the whole nutraceutical into two segments. One is dietary supplements, and second is functional food and beverages. This industry is expected to grow from about $10 billion to about $15 billion in the next 5 years. In my earlier presentation, I spoke about our young demographics, which is true. Of our population, only 7.5% of our population is above the age of 60. But for the size of India, that percentage is about 100 million people above the age of 60. But unfortunately, we also have the second largest number of diabetics in the world at about 80 odd million. And the other aspect, which was, when we were doing the research, it came out we have 15% of our population, nearly 200 million people, who suffer from some kind of arthritis. In fact, it's estimated that even 40 million knee replacements are required. What it gives you an idea is why there is a need for this segment in India. It's not only as a luxury or as an option. So with that, we move into the first part of this segment, which is the dietary supplements. Have a look at the slide here. Yes, this is expected to grow at about 6%, out of which vitamins and minerals is the most important segment with about 40% of the market share. Then we have herbal supplements. In fact, later on in the presentation, I will go more deep into the importance of herbal. What we are also seeing is some multinational companies also launching herbal supplements. Then we have proteins as well. So these are the three. And some of the fastest growing products within this are fish oil and omega fatty acids. We have taken one example. For example, a company Amway, they said that India is amongst the top 10 markets currently, but it will be amongst the top 3 markets in the next 5 years. And why is this? I think urbanization is playing a very important role. In the next 20 years, we expect about 250 million more people to move to urban centers. And we will talk about it later as to why urbanization is playing a role, because it has a direct impact on our lifestyle. So about dietary supplements, these are some of the players with their products in India. We have some large Indian players also have a presence here. Moving to the second segment, which is the functional food. It's growing faster. It's growing at about 10% and expected to reach about $4 billion. But I would split the end user into two categories. One is a large I spoke about disparity in my earlier presentation. Unfortunately, we still have in India about 200 million people who are below poverty line. And there is malnutrition there of essential micronutrients. So, what a dedicated policy is to fortify the staple food. So, what is the fortify? The most common is vegetable and cereal oil. So that we take care of this deficiency, and you'll be surprised to know that the deficiency of vitamin A, which is not surprising, but vitamin D, which is due to sunlight, but there is deficiency of that. We've also taken a program for milk fortification, again for vitamin A and vitamin D. Now, for this urban segment of the population, which I spoke about, we are looking at fortification of milk formula, breakfast cereals, bread, yogurt, sweet biscuits, snack bars, and fruit snacks. The whole shebang for fortification. Of this, probiotic yogurt is being growing at a clip of about 20-24%. And we had a Japanese company who were one of the pioneers in this to launch this probiotic yogurt in those nice small bottles. Then we are also having some new launches by some of the global players, be it in terms of baby food, be it in terms of new edible oil. So this segment is new launches cutting across consumer segments in India. If I look at the next one, which is functional beverages, despite being a tropical country, we love our hot beverages. We are the largest consumers of milk, and we use for functional beverages for milk. All of us have grown up with that. Some of the GlaxoSmithKline is one of the largest players in that. But one of the growing categories is also the sports drinks. We are not exactly known for our athleticism. We play cricket. But the younger generation, I must say, is more sports oriented. And this battle on the sports drink has got the two big boys of the world together with their respective brands in India. But one interesting insight for this category is that government is encouraging the use of natural juice within the drinks. In fact, if you use natural ingredients, including fruits and vegetables, you have a lower tax rate to pay. And our regulator, which is Food Safety and Security Authority of India, is very clear on some rules with regards to caffeine, with regards to prescribed limits of vitamins, thiamine, riboflavin. So they are very particular. And this goes with the line how regulation and awareness are going hand in hand. So what are the broader trends? I mentioned about awareness. In fact, our regulator has said that there will be a red light symbol for foods that are high in fat, sugar, and salt. Then we have a campaign called Safe and Nutritious Food at Home, which we plan to reach about 400 households. Affluence, as I said, urbanization has played a role in having these lifestyle, shall I say, diseases and consumption of food items with high salt and sugar and low micronutrients. One other opportunity for a foreign company is from India as a manufacturing base. I spoke about largest producer of milk. We are second largest producer of rice and cereals. We are one of the largest producers of botanical ingredients. And I'll come on that later. So we have almost all the large companies, global companies, have their manufacturing in India. And to give you an idea how good our manufacturing practices are, India has the largest number of US FDA approved plants in the pharma sector outside of the US. We are also setting up food parks, which are good clusters to set up this manufacturing. In fact, we also have certain large companies having their R&D as they customize their taste. Remember my first presentation, across the region diversity? So a lot of R&D is required to customize maybe the taste buds for our citizens in Northern India, Southern India. Moving on, what are some of the other opportunities? I have a lot of them listed, but I'll talk very briefly on a few of them. Number one is the breakfast cereals. It's growing at a fast clip of about 22%. Fermented foods and baking alternatives. We're also having fitness-related wearables, and I'm guilty. I bought one, but I never used it. Then we have protein powders. And one of the factors I'll touch upon is the role of private equity. Private equity in India has been funding these new companies who've come up with new delivery models, be it on e-pharmacies, I'll talk about it, and be it on specialist companies which are focused on cold pressed juices. So that has been a big driver of creating capacity in India. I'll rush through next two slides, which is just to give you an idea of some of the large players present across functional food, functional beverages, dietary supplement, and also some Indian players. And today, in a lot of, or what used to be the normal earlier at the airport shops, you used to see a lot of Indian products across Europe. I'm sure as airports open up, we will see that. And this is some of what we have given is how deep some of the global names, including Swiss name, has gone, where they have a range of products, plus they have a range of manufacturing in India. I'll briefly touch upon wellness. The pyramid comes back again, and wellness is restricted to really the top end of the pyramid. And here, I must highlight that we have a population of about 10 million households, which earns the same income level as a European household. Now, that's the target market for wellness. And within that, we see a lot of presence in rejuvenation segment. Presence of global players like Elizabeth Arden, L'Occitane, Estee Lauder, SkinCeuticals, Neutrogena. And for rejuvenation, we have some of the fancy resorts for yoga and up in the Himalayas, which are large consumers of these products, both Indian and foreign products. But we have one area which is not mentioned here, is our Indian wedding. That is a big user of some of these products, both as part of gifting as well as our weddings, which could go into hundreds of people. Moving on. The organic food, we are ranked number 9 in terms of the overall, but we have the largest number of organic farmers in India. And these are the states which account for majority of our organic farming. In fact, we have one state, very small, highlighted, which has all its area under cultivation. And we export $500 million of organic products to Europe, European Union, Switzerland. So clearly, that's one big area. And we expect this trend to continue, both for demand for exports as well as from large urban centers. Herbals. I spoke that a lot of companies are launching herbal supplements, and we are the second largest exporter of medicinal plants. We are home to 6,500 species of herbal plants, and we produce 100 million tons annually. Some of the names, neem, tulsi, amla, these are something in the current scenario, I believe, are finding demand across the globe. We have a special ministry of Ayush. We have 400 nurseries you see on our map. And we also have research centers. But for herbal products, distribution plays a very important role in India. So what does distribution look like? This map gives you an idea, but clearly there are 7 key distribution channels. Please allow me to explain. One is the mom and pop retailers. India has 12 million mom and pop retailers. Second is the emergence of, and they account for nearly 85% of all retail. However, we have modern retail, the retails like Co-op or Walmart, they occupy 12.5% share. And they've been growing at 25%. Then we have online, which is growing at 76% growth rate. Then we have pharmacies. India has 850,000 independent pharmacies. Almost 99% of all our pharmacies offline. But we have that 1%, which is also becoming e-pharmacy. And I want to talk about that because there are companies now who are launching their products in urban centers which are available through these e-pharmacies. We are having specialist online health products company, and they've been funded by private equity. They are going for the subscription model. So clearly so distribution used to be a huge entry barrier for foreign companies. But with the onset of this online pharmacies, online groceries, the modern retail, that has to some extent really created a level playing field for new brands. These are some of the flow charts with regards to regulation. I won't go through them, but now we have a well streamlined process, a lot of it based on whether it's animal or agri products. This slide, I have put a label specifically to give you an idea what kind of information is required on the nutritional labeling, warning, ingredient lists, what could be a health hazard. This is very important if you're exporting your product to India. But this label can give you more details. We also need to talk about what are the ingredients which are allowed, what are the flavors which are allowed, what are the prohibited items, what are the tolerance limit. So all this is available as one resource for you to access later. Thank you so much.
For putting such a large sector, such a new sector, which is developing in those 15 minutes. Let me now move on to the next section of the webinar, which deals with the legal and tax matters relating to the nutraceuticals and wellness sector. I'll first invite Ms. Ritika, Senior Associate, to please take. Aurora, you can come on the screen.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Singh, and thank you to Mr. Gupta as well for the insightful presentation. Now here, of course, we are dealing with a very interesting and pertinent topic, which is nutraceuticals and wellness. Now, we, of course, being a lawyer, I would want everybody right side of law. So the idea here is to give an overview of some of the critical things which somebody who's looking to venture into the Indian market should be mindful of. A lot of it has already been covered by Dr. Gupta, but I'll just take you through them. Now, the first and foremost thing that we need to bear in mind is to look at the FDI policy and the foreign exchange laws in India. Happily so, there is 100% FDI in the manufacturing sector under the automatic route, which means that there is no requirement of going forward for a government approval in such a case. Again, FDI of up to 100% is permitted in pharmaceutical entities under greenfield investments, and 74% in brownfield investments, beyond which you need to go for a government approval. 100% FDI through government approval is allowed in food retailing with respect to food products manufactured in India. So these are some key points that one has to keep in mind. Now with this, as a first step, it's important for you to do an analysis of the model that you want to venture into India with. For example, we have various models which are permissible under the Indian legal framework, such as a LISO office, a branch office, a project office, private limited company, or joint venture company. So depending on the business model and on several other factors, such as the model will differ in the sense of what is the scope of permitted activities and incomes. For example, the scope of activities permitted in a LISO office is basically just to act as a communication channel on behalf of the head office. They cannot undertake any commercial activities. So that's one thing. Then the scope of remittances that are permitted outside India, the establishment procedure and the compliance requirements. So these are some steps which one needs to bear in mind when deciding on an appropriate model to enter into India with. Now, another critical thing that has come about very recently in the wake of COVID-19 is an FDI norm change, as per which all foreign investments from countries which share border with India, irrespective of the sector that you want to come into, would require private government approval. Now, the regulations, of course, require some clarification, but at the moment, it can be anticipated that they may even extend to identifying who your ultimate beneficial owner is. So in that sense, it's very important to have a proper transaction planning in place before entering into the Indian market. Now, with this, I would give you an overview of the sector-specific laws that we are looking at. Now, India, of course, has been on the global front in the sense of ease of doing business, ensuring that there is, compliances, relaxation during in the wake of COVID-19. Apart from that, additionally, it's important to note that India has constantly been amending its regulations to be up to speed and to bring it in line with the global standards, especially in this food processing sector, in the sector of nutraceuticals and wellness. So in that sense, India, the policies and the legal framework is quite at par with what the global standards are. Now, there's also a constant endeavor to simplify the labor law compliances. Of course, one of the things that we keep hearing time and again is that India has a myriad of labor laws and it is difficult to understand it. To combat this issue, the government is in the process of consolidating and unifying everything into four codes, which will consolidate over 44 laws. So that's one area where we can definitely expect some relaxation and some uniformity in the coming years. Now, coming specifically to nutraceuticals and wellness, needless to mention, the Food Safety and Standards Act, along with several rules, is very critical for this. Now, this act lays down the standards to be maintained for any kind of food production or selling of food products in India. The specific reference to the rule that I've listed out here is the Food Safety and Standards Food or Health Supplements, Nutraceuticals, Foods for Special Dietary Uses, Special Medicinal Purposes, Functional Foods, and Novel Food Regulations of 2016. Now, these regulations came into effect in January of 2018, and it's critical to understand these particular regulations because they give a categorization of food products that are based on contents and uses, and importantly also the quality requirements, labeling and packaging requirements, which was touched upon in the previous presentation as well. With this, another legislation that is critical is the Legal Metrology Act and the Legal Metrology Packaged Commodity Rules, which enforces standards of weights and measures, regulates trading of goods sold by measure, weight, and prescribes essential labeling standards and mandatory declarations on all packages. Now, another thing for wellness sector specifically is an accreditation from the National Accreditation Board for Hospitals and Healthcare Providers. These set out a set of standards for evaluation and certification of wellness sectors in line with the global standards. And there are several benefits which are attached to this accreditation. Now, for several sectors, this is not mandatory at the moment, but we would need to check the exact nature of operations to be able to identify whether a mandatory certification is required or not in the light of changes that keep happening. Now, with this overview, I would like to just touch upon some opportunities that we have, of course, here. We are seeing a constant change in trend in India, especially where mental well-being is being recognized as a critical part. Also, in the recent times, we noticed that insurance policies now, insurance covers in India also cover a mental well-being insurance cover. Then the second thing is there is an increased awareness. There's an increase in the disposable income. And of course, with the change in lifestyle, we are noticing that there is ample opportunity and scope and potential in this sphere. So these are some opportunities coupled with the aggressive investment plans in India, where we see a lot of potential in this field. Now, this is it from the legal side. Now, I would like to hand over the mic to my colleague Gaurav, who will take you through the tax updates.
Now, talking about tax and what foreign investor need to take care in mind while investing in India, there are basically two things which a foreign investor need to keep in mind. One is the, just a second, I'll just open the slides. Yeah. So there are basically two things which a foreign investor should keep in mind. One is the compliances requirement in India and what are the compliance costs to undertake such compliances. And the second is the tax costs related to their supply chain and their taxable income. So these are the two things which any foreign investor before investing into India should analyze in detail. Now, India legal taxation legislative framework is very structured. It's like any other European Union or other countries, and it is still growing because of the globalization, and there are a lot of reforms which has been introduced, and there are many more in pipelines. Now, the promise of the government is that they want to provide a tax-friendly approach, and they would bring out certainly a lot of reforms in future as well, depending on the situation and the demands of the industry. Now, if we talk about the types of taxation in India, there are two types. One is the direct tax, which is the tax on income of any taxpayer, and the other is the indirect tax, which is the tax on the consumption. And now talking about the direct taxation, it has primarily four limbs in India. One is the domestic income tax law, which is the Income Tax Act 1961. Now this provides for rules for how to compute your income tax and what are the compliances requirement. And then it also talks about the administrative provision to govern your income tax and how you will be assessed. India also has double taxation avoidance agreement treaty signed with more than 90 countries, including Switzerland. Now, this allows any foreign investor, because they have a presence in more than 2 countries, and same income is sometimes getting taxed in both the jurisdiction. So this agreement helps them avoid the double taxation incidents in more than one jurisdiction. Now, India also have a transfer pricing in the local transfer pricing rule, which provides for the compliances which are required to be done in India. It's more or less very similar to the OECD guidelines. In addition, it also has country by country reporting requirement, and that has to be fulfilled. Now, as far as the fourth limb is concerned, it's about India digital tax. Now, India has been a front runner as far as the digital taxation is concerned, how to tax e-commerce transaction. So this equalization levy was introduced way back in 2016, but in April 2020, the scope of this equalization levy, or the India's digital tax, was extended, and it is very similar now to the European Union Commission proposal on the digital taxation of digital service tax. So it's more or less very similar, but India's equalization levy is a little wider in scope due to the language used under the law. Now, coming on to the major updates in the field of direct tax which are relevant for foreign investors. Now, the main highlight of this presentation is the reduced corporate tax rate, which Mr. Gupta has already covered. I'll just briefly mention it again because it is very important and it impacts your key takeaway profit from any investment in India. So for base corporate tax, it provides 22%, but if you have a manufacturing concern in India, the rate is further reduced to 15%, and this is provided to promote Make in India initiative of the government. Now, this coupled with from 1st April 2020, there was a concept of the dividend distribution tax. Now, this has been abolished. So this means for foreign investor, any investment which they repatriate in the form of dividend, that will be taxable in the hands of foreign investor, which means that they can now avail the beneficial tax treaty rate of 10%. Now, earlier this rate was 20% because foreign any Indian concern who was distributing dividend was paying that particular tax on that particular distribution. Now, since this has been again bring back to the foreign investor, they can take the tax treaty rates of 10%. So there is a tax cost saving of 10%. Also, they can check if they can get the foreign tax credit in their resident country. Now, Switzerland specifically has a participation rule which provides that any dividend which they receive in Switzerland will not be taxed again, and there are certain other exemption available. And due to this, there is overall tax cost saving of, with this reduced corporate tax rate and this abolishment of dividend distribution tax, there is a straightaway benefits of 15% of the tax cost, which is huge. So basically, you can see that what the government is doing for foreign investor and to attract the investment in India. There is one more provision that if you invest through a short-term loan or a long-term loan via ECB in foreign currency, then the tax rate on that particular interest income is it's taxed at the rate of 5%, which is lower as compared to the normal tax rate under the treaty of 10% or under the domestic tax law of 20%. So this was highlights highlights of how Indian government was trying to increase the investment in India in terms of tax costs. Now, as far as tax litigation is concerned, the government is providing you a mechanism wherein you can approach the tax authority and get an advance ruling of any tax implication on your proposed transaction. The government has also provided that you can approach the competent authority of the income tax authorities, and they will sit together with the Switzerland authority by way of a mutual agreement procedure, and they will decide if any issue is raised by the taxpayer. Now, the government is also providing the APM mechanism wherein you can pre-agree the rate in which you can deal with the related party so that there is no transfer pricing disputes in future. It also provides for some tax incentive for employment generation, and if you pay euro 100 for salary to the low grade employee, you get additional euro 90 in euro 30 in consecutive 3 years. So that's actually a very beneficial provision specifically meant to increase the employment generation in India. And then any foreign investor who is investing in India should keep this provision in mind to determine their margins in which they have to work in India. Then other digital taxation and other important updates that are not very relevant for foreign investors, the other updates, but digital taxation I've already covered. So I'll move on to the indirect tax laws in India. So in that, first comes the custom duty. India imposes custom duty on the goods imported into India. Now, it also has a foreign trade policy wherein it provides for remission of duty or some other benefits from goods or services which are exported out of India. This is primarily defined or designed to again further promote the Make in India initiative. So if you have a manufacturing concern in India or a service industry in India and you are exporting and earning foreign currency for India, then they provide you certain remission of duty drawback, and reduced rate of taxes. Now, last but not the least, as Mr. Gupta has already covered, there is a concept of goods and service tax, which is very similar to the European Union VAT mechanism. This is a consumption tax, and what Indian government has done is that there were earlier various state laws and other central laws. They have unified it into one common law. So for foreign investor, now it becomes very easy to understand one law and then what are the compliance required to make under one goods and service tax law. And under this GST regime, they have provided for e-way bill facilities, which facilitates that the cross-border movements of goods would become easy and faster, quicker. Then as in the income tax regime, they have also something called advanced ruling mechanism for GST. The only difference between the income tax and GST advanced ruling mechanism is that the rulings are provided by the Commissioner of Income Tax, whereas in income tax, they are provided by the retired judges of High Court and Supreme Court. So you have to be very careful of how you draft the GST application. However, the number of GST authority, advanced ruling authority under GST are much more than the income tax, and you can expect a speedy resolution. So this is something also very beneficial, and this avoids tax litigation in India. So this was it from the tax update for foreign investor, what they need to keep in mind, and how the Indian government is helping in promoting the investment in India. Over to you, Dr. Singh.
Presentation. Now let me now move on to the question answer session. There are a number of interesting detail seeking questions, but I'll try to pose them in the order of the presenters appearing on screen. So first question I'll pose to Mr. Tarun Gupta. It's slightly encrypted. I'll decipher it for you. And so it says that it's in the field of functional food and beverage market fragmentation, inquiring whether is it fragmented or concentrated, and is the functional food or beverages market dominated by local players or multinational companies? I think that's the idea of the question.
Got it. I think it's a pertinent question. See, if you look at our hot beverages segment, it's dominated, hot beverages, functional beverages, it's dominated by the large players, right? The large multinationals. However, what we are seeing a new trend is for some of the cold pressed juices, some of our new functional food categories, right? The fruit snacks bars. We are seeing some young companies coming in. So I would put the whole companies into three brackets. Hot beverages dominated by large players, but the new cold juices, functional beverages coming by the younger players, plus the large Indian players who already have a presence, who are launching new products into this category. But the second category, which is the younger players, they are really playing an important role. And also they have been funded by private equity. Plus the fourth segment is the imported brands. But there the price point is a bit of challenge. But distribution, because of what I said earlier, has become easier because they can piggy bank on the e-commerce platform.
And this, these younger companies which are coming in, do you find them, largely also a result of the, of the emphasis on startup and entrepreneurship, which
Correct.
has been there in the last few years?
Correct, because as the audience may be aware, India has the third largest startup ecosystem in the world, and we have our own program, Startup India, which will be funding 10,000 startups in India, right? So we have having both startups which are funded through government plans, and we also have a lot of investors' money, Indian family offices coming in, and these are brands which have created a niche only in the last 4-5 years.
Tarunji, one more question which you might be able to answer, which says that for nutraceuticals exports out of India to Switzerland, is CDSCO permit mandatory?
See, I will answer this. I'll step back and answer this question. See, worldwide, the nutraceutical definition is highly divergent. It includes isolated nutrients, dietary supplements, herbal medicines, functional foods, medical specific diets, and beverages. So now, depending on where your product falls under, the regulating authority can be different in India. Okay, so it can be under the Food and Safety FSSAI, it can be under the Ministry of Ayush, it can be under CDSCO, depending on the health claim made and the ingredient used.
Okay, so I think we need more details on that question.
So once we have these details, we can ascertain which authority it will fall under based on the claim made and the ingredient used.
Okay, there's one other question. How do you see India's chances of attracting relocation of supply chains in the post-COVID-19 period vis-a-vis ASEAN competition? So something that I would like to speak on.
I have a smile on my face because I think this is a question which is asked in every forum. Yeah, and rightly so. Right, today, every global player, mid-sized company is looking to reduce its dependence on any one particular country. Yeah. And so, yes, we have competition. As one of my slides said, the new competition is from the ASEAN region. There's a new competition. And till about 2 years ago, our tax rates were not competitive. Okay. But now our tax rates are competitive. Our infrastructure has made considerable progress. Yeah. So my question is, yes, supply chains, there will be a reorganization of supply chains. Definitely. Now it's India and ASEAN countries really which will be competing for this rejigging of supply chain. One big advantage we stand to have is our domestic market. And coupled with these policy initiatives of land, which was traditionally expensive and cumbersome, I think we stand a fairly good chance. But of course, we need to maintain our momentum of reforms.
Okay, we just received one more question, which is any special support programs or schemes for herbal medicines like aloe vera, ashwagandha, etc. Anything on that you would like to comment?
Yeah, so we have a program called the National Ayush Mission, which is there for supporting the plant, the cultivation of medicinal plants, okay, and the processing of the same. So what happens is we have different categories under medicinal plants, and there is different subsidy provided on that particular plant. For example, aloe vera is there. So for per acre, there is a subsidy given by the government. Okay, and it also depends which part of the country you are cultivating. So for example, in the Northeast, there is higher subsidy. Yeah. And second, there is also support mechanism for post-harvest infrastructure. So yes, to answer your question, there is our plan under our National Ayush Mission to support this.
Okay, I think that answers the question. Thank you, Mr. Gupta. Given that you had made 2 presentations, so it was it was quite essential that a number of questions will be posed to you. So
Absolutely.
thank you. Let me now move on to the next speaker, who was Ms. Britika Arora. So there's a question that we are a popular bakery confectionery close to Zurich and would like to enter into Indian market. What would be the best way, and what all do we need to keep in mind?
Okay, sure. So this is an interesting question, and while we will have to, specifically examine the facts on a preliminary overview, what I can say is that a lot of our clients, a lot of our Swiss clients also for that matter, have entered India as a LISA office, where basically they were acting as a communication channel, exploring the market, not undertaking commercial activities, because as a LISA office, you're not allowed to. And then eventually they ventured and they became private limited companies. So that's one way in which we can look at it. But of course, this is something that will depend on the business model also. For example, if you're planning to partner with an Indian partner for some reason, then probably you can also look at the joint venture model here. So there are various options that are available, and we can analyze the pros and cons, and then in that sense we can advise. But from a compliance perspective, this will vary. For example, a private limited company is required to undertake various compliances. There is a particular, there is an entire legislation called the Companies Act, which one needs to comply with. There are various formalities, etc. So in that sense, we will be able to advise better if we have a better grasp on facts. But this is an overview of the options that can be explored.
And I think we have worked on a good paper on entering India, and the various ways. Maybe we could share that subsequently with the company. There's one more question for you, Ritika. If our contract manufacturing partner in India has FSSAI certification, would my wholly owned subsidiary require the same?
So, this FSSAI registration is required by all food business operators, even if you're in importing or distributing of foods. So if I understand it correctly, if you fall under any of the categories, for example, even if you're distributing a food product, food manufactured or food packaging, or there are various other activities, and on that basis, you might just be required to, even if your contract manufacturing partner has a registration already in place.
Okay. Thank you, Ritika. I move on to the next speaker, who was Mr. Gaurav Makhijani. Gaurav, there's a very generic question asking how complicated is it for a foreign company to undertake all the taxation related returns and exercises. So can you just guide us how complicated it is in India? So, or how easy it is in India? I mean, both ways.
Okay, so the government is working on that. It's a very good question. The government is actually working on that, and in April 2020 only, they have decided that for passive income, now the foreign companies are not required to file their tax return. So that's one step towards the ease of compliances in India. Then there are further digitalization of the compliances, and there is a concept of pre-filled tax return which has been introduced from April 2020. So for every foreign company, they will keep a track of your transaction from your tax registration, and then they will allow you a pre-filled tax return. So that makes your task easier, that you just check those tax return if the pre-filled tax return is fine or not, and then you file the tax return, and then they are providing you a PowerPoint presentation of how to file your tax return. Then if you visit income tax website of the Indian income tax website, it also provides for various rules wherein they have described each and every process. So it's not like it was before 10 years, but a lot of work is still yet to be done. But having said that, from a foreign investor perspective, if they're not aware of Indian income tax law, there could be some complication involved. So it's always suggested that they analyze all the tax impact at the first place. But as far as compliances are concerned, if you're aware of your tax liabilities in India, compliance is comparatively very easy.
Okay. Thank you, Gaurav. So with that, we come to the conclusion of the webinar. I hope that we have been able to provide you with the right information. All the PPTs that we showed today on screen would be available on our website, missb.ch, shortly. We'll also be converting this webinar into a podcast, and we'll release it. I hope that we have been able to reiterate and reinforce the idea that there are lots of complementarities, possibilities between India and Switzerland in the field of nutraceuticals and wellness. With those words, again, thanking all of you for joining us. Have a good day ahead. Thank you.